I didn't cry when my husband died. I didn't cry when the roof leaked or when I had to pick up extra shifts just to keep the lights on. But I cried today. Standing on the porch I built, hearing my own son laugh as his wife said, "She's not even family anymore." Not even family. After 30 years of scrubbing their floors, holding their babies, paying off their debts, I became nothing more than a guest at the door I once opened for them. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The laughter came sharp and sudden, like a slap through an open window. "She's not even family anymore," Evan said. The words echoed down the driveway, landing like a stone at Margaret Lane's feet. She stood frozen at the edge of the walkway, her Sunday flats crunching faintly on the gravel. Her hand, wrapped tightly around the worn leather strap of her purse, didn't move. Neither did the rest of her. On the front lawn, beneath a banner that read, "Happy Retirement, Evan," her son stood flanked by guests and cheap catering trays. Vanessa, as always, was camera-ready, hair stiff with spray, lips pulled into a smirk that didn't bother pretending to be kind. She leaned into Evan's arm, nodding like his personal audience. A few people chuckled nervously, unsure of the joke. Then the smiles faded. Heads turned, eyes flicked toward the end of the walk where Margaret stood in her blue church dress, back straight, face unreadable. No one moved to greet her. Abby stood near the porch steps, plastic cup clutched tight in both hands. Her eyes found Maggie's, wide, unsure, and immediately dropped to the ground. The silence swelled around them. Margaret felt it crawling up her throat like smoke. It wasn't just the shame, it was the clarity. That single laugh, cruel and offhand, unraveled months of tension, years of quiet erasure. She was being pushed out not with shouts, but with shrugs. A mother traded for a mortgage, a widow reclassified as inconvenient, a woman undone by silence. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder slowly, almost thoughtfully. Her fingers trembled, but her chin didn't. Then came a voice, gravelly, old, and uninvited. "She built this family." Harold Green's shout cracked through the awkward stillness. Every head snapped toward the peeling porch next door. There he stood, one hand on the rail, the other clenched around a glass of sweet tea, as if he'd been watching this whole thing unfold from the shadows. Maggie turned slightly, blinking up at him. Her breath caught, not from shock, but from the fact that someone had finally said it out loud. "She built this house," Harold growled, taking a defiant step down. "She planted those apple trees with her own hands, put in the siding, painted every damn wall while Evan was off trying to sell vacuum cleaners in Ohio." Vanessa rolled her eyes, muttering, "He's senile." But Harold wasn't done. "You've got the nerve to throw a party in her front yard and pretend she don't exist? I've known her since '78. Longer than either of you been pretending to be decent." There was a beat, a tight, uncomfortable pause where nobody knew where to look. Abby blinked fast, her throat bobbing. "Grandma," she whispered, stepping forward. I didn't know they were going to say that." Margaret didn't speak. Her gaze was still fixed on her son, who now wore that familiar expression, tight-lipped, annoyed as if any emotion other than his own was an inconvenience. She stepped once onto the pathway, then again, and again. Every footfall measured, intentional. The tension in the air shifted as guests parted down the middle like uncertain water. Vanessa's voice tried to rise over the moment. "Let's not make a scene, Maggie." This is Evan's day, but Maggie didn't answer her. She stopped at the base of the porch, looked up, and said nothing. Evan opened his mouth, but the words faltered. Maybe because for the first time his mother didn't look sad. She didn't even look angry. She just looked done. Margaret turned without a word, walked back down the steps, and crossed the property line. Harold met her halfway down his porch stairs. "You don't gotta say a thing," he muttered. "But I will." She looked up at him, eyes glistening, but her voice was steady. "Thank you, Harold." "Hell," he said, offering his arm. Someone had to say it. Behind them, the hum of fake celebration tried to start again. Forced laughs, awkward murmurs. But it was thinner now. Transparent. The air was different. Maggie allowed herself one last glance at the porch she had scrubbed for 30 years. Her son stood on it like a guest, not an heir. Her daughter-in-law smiled through her teeth. Abby stood alone. As Maggie stepped onto Harold's porch, her voice barely a breath, she said, "Neighbors remember what children forget." Harold Green didn't stop at the bottom of his porch steps. He kept walking. Slow, deliberate, across the sun-bleached patch of lawn that divided his cracked concrete walkway from the manicured path Maggie had just vacated. His faded overalls rustled with each step, boots crunching on the brittle grass, as if the years between 1978 and now hadn't dulled his spine one bit. Evan noticed him coming too late. "You should be ashamed," Harold said, not shouting this time, just low and firm, like a verdict. "Your father would have been." Evan let out a small, annoyed scoff, trying to turn it into a laugh, but it died in his throat. His arms crossed, jaw tightening. "This isn't your business, Harold." Harold didn't flinch. "He'd have never let you turn this house into a prize to be won." People shifted again, the crowd uneasy. The kind of discomfort that comes when a party's illusions collapse mid-sentence. One woman stepped back toward the sidewalk, muttering an excuse about her dog. Another fiddled with her phone, pretending not to listen while she recorded everything. Vanessa clapped her hands once, sharp. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous. Can someone get him some water? Maybe sit him down?" "I don't need water," Harold snapped, eyes locked on Evan. "I need you to understand that standing on your mother's porch and laughing like she's some forgotten relic is a disgrace." Maggie, still standing near the edge of Harold's yard, turned slightly, her spine still straight but her face softer now, almost like it had caught a breeze. She didn't speak, but her chin dipped once, a nod that held 3 decades of grief and one sharp edge of gratitude. Vanessa let out a dramatic sigh. "He's senile. Ignore him. He probably thinks it's still 1994. "Funny," Harold said, voice rising just enough, "because I remember 1994 just fine. That was the year Maggie co-signed the loan that kept your sorry excuse for a startup afloat." Evan. A few more gasps now, quiet but real. Vanessa's mouth opened in protest, then shut again. Abby took a tentative step forward from the edge of the porch. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked like she was holding her breath. She didn't say much, just leaned toward her grandmother and whispered, "I believe him, Grandma." Maggie turned her head slowly toward her granddaughter. Her eyes glistened again, but this time the tears didn't rise to the surface. They just shimmered there, caught in a web of something fiercer than sadness. "I know," Maggie whispered back, the words shaped more in breath than voice. And for the first time since the banner had gone up and the platters were laid out, Maggie's fingers unclenched from the strap of her purse. Harold finally turned to her. "You don't have to stand in the street, Mags." "I know," she said again, louder now, then stepped forward. Not toward Evan, not toward the porch she used to scrub with lemon soap every other Sunday, but toward Harold, the only one whose memory hadn't gone selective. Vanessa reached out a hand toward Evan, whispering something low and panicked. He shook it off. "We're not doing this here," he muttered. "You already did," Harold said. "You just didn't expect anyone to answer." Vanessa's laugh was brittle. "This is pathetic." But the crowd didn't laugh with her. Maggie walked past her son like he was a stranger in a borrowed suit. Her heels clicked once against the bottom step, then stopped. She didn't need to climb anything. Not anymore. She turned slightly, looking out. Not at the guests, not at the house, but at Abby. "You coming?" she asked softly. Abby hesitated just a second too long, then set her cup down on the porch rail and walked after her grandmother. Vanessa hissed, "You've got to be kidding me!" Harold extended his arm again, but Maggie didn't take it this time. She stood on her own, shoulders squared as Abby fell in beside her. And in that pause, between the woman left behind and the girl who chose to follow, something old and invisible shifted. The porch behind them looked smaller now. The people on it, unsure. Harold broke the silence one last time, his voice low enough that only Maggie and Abby could really hear it. "You didn't lose your place. They just got too proud to see it," Maggie exhaled. Not a sigh, not relief, just release. The house creaked as Maggie entered, the kind of familiar protest old floorboards make when they remember who raised them. She didn't bother with the lights, just walked through the dim hallway with the kind of muscle memory only 30 years of living could build. Abby followed quietly behind, her phone gripped in one hand, the other trailing the worn wood of the hallway's trim like she was touching history. Harold was already seated at the kitchen table, a battered manila envelope in front of him. He looked smaller than he had outside, less like a town crier and more like an old soldier dusting off one last mission. Maggie didn't sit. She placed her purse on the counter, then stood across from him. "What is that?" Harold tapped the envelope once. "Proof." She didn't move, so he opened it. Inside were 2 crisp deed copies, notarized, dated, stamped in blue ink that had only slightly faded with time. The names were clear. One line read Thomas Lane, the other read Margaret Lane. Harold slid the top one toward her. "Tom had me keep 'em, said he didn't trust banks." Or Evan. Maggie stared down at the paper like it had risen from a grave. "I thought Evan handled the transfer after Tom died," she said, voice barely audible. Harold shook his head. "He asked about it. Poked around, but nothing ever changed hands, and your name never came off." "Your husband made sure of that." Abby stepped closer, her breath catching. "So, you still own the house?" Maggie didn't answer right away. She picked up the deed with both hands like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. Her fingers traced the corner, the texture of truth thicker than she remembered. "I didn't even know this still existed," she whispered. "Well, it does," Harold said, "and it says it's yours." Maggie's knees finally gave in. She sat across from him, the kitchen chair sighing under her weight like an old friend reunited. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at the page. Abby leaned in, voice low but charged. "They don't know you still own it." Maggie's lips parted just slightly. Her son had laughed in her face. Her daughter-in-law had tried to rewrite the story with smiles and Instagram posts. But sitting there at the old pine kitchen table, where birthday candles had once been blown out and soup cooled in winter, sat the one thing none of them could control: the truth. She gripped the document tighter. "Not yet," she said quietly. Abby looked confused. "Not yet what?" But Maggie didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked toward the old filing cabinet by the pantry door. It groaned as she opened it. She tucked the deeds inside, careful, like they were glass. Then she shut the drawer with a soft click. Harold stood, readying to leave. "I'll testify, if it comes to that." Maggie nodded slowly. "Let's hope it doesn't." He gave her a long look before tipping his head and stepping out the back door. Now it was just her and Abby in the hush of the kitchen, the fridge humming a steady background rhythm like an old heartbeat. Maggie poured herself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter. Abby fidgeted beside her, unsure. "Grandma, are you okay?" Maggie took a sip. The water was cold and sharp, like reality settling in. She didn't answer right away. Her mind was already moving. Backward, forward, through signatures and silences and the bitter edge of betrayal. Then, with a faint smile curling at the corner of her mouth, she said, "They mocked my place." She turned to look at Abby, eyes calm now, steady. "They forgot who holds the title." The bank hadn't changed much in 20 years. Still beige walls, still potted ferns that looked plastic even when they weren't, still the same gentle muzak humming like the sound of a polite lie. Margaret Lane stepped through the glass doors with her shoulders squared and her chin slightly raised. She wore her Sunday best again, not because she had to, but because the armor fit. Abby walked beside her, dressed down in a hoodie and jeans, her phone zipped tight in her bag. She looked up at the teller line, eyes scanning for anything familiar. Maggie didn't bother. She already knew where she was going. Charles Bennett's office was tucked at the far end, past a quiet hallway of framed local awards and photos of scholarship recipients. His nameplate hadn't changed. Still embossed brass, still slightly crooked. When Maggie knocked, his voice called out instantly, "Come in." Charles stood when she entered. He was broader than he'd been in the 90s, hair thinner, glasses thicker, but his smile was unchanged, half formal, half friendly, all Midwestern decency. "Margaret Lane," he said with a warmth that felt real. "My favorite customer from another lifetime." "You're still here," she said, managing a small smile. "They haven't kicked me out yet." "Sit, please." Maggie sat across from him while Abby lingered quietly near the window. Charles gestured toward the manila folder in Maggie's hands. "Something tells me this isn't a social visit." Maggie slid the folder toward him. He opened it and whistled under his breath. "Original deed copies. Fully notarized. These are pristine." "They're mine," she said, steady. Charles nodded. "Yes, ma'am." They are. A quiet pause filled the space, respectful, not hesitant. "I need to confirm everything," Maggie said. "No assumptions. No paperwork I haven't seen. Just facts." Charles leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "Fair enough. Let me check something." He typed quickly into the computer, squinting at the screen. Abby shifted in her seat. The seconds stretched. Then Charles frowned. "What?" Maggie asked, her voice still calm but cooler now. Charles clicked twice more, then looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "There was a loan attempt 6 months ago," he said. "Someone filed an application using this property as collateral." Maggie's jaw tightened. "Who?" "Evan Lane." Charles didn't hesitate. Abby let out a soft gasp, hand covering her mouth. Maggie said nothing. Her eyes stayed on Charles, unblinking. "He submitted preliminary documents, most likely fabricated. The appraisal form was generic, and the signature authorization page was missing yours." Maggie looked down at the desk for a long moment. She wasn't surprised, but that didn't cool the fire starting to churn low in her chest. "I never signed anything," she said. Charles nodded slowly. "I know. That's why we flagged it. Denied the file before it even reached underwriting." She met his gaze. "He tried to borrow against my house." He didn't answer, which told her enough. The silence grew heavy again. Then Charles leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Margaret, I strongly recommend you have this property secured legally. File an ownership reaffirmation, update all records. Get everything under a protective trust if possible, especially if he's willing to pull something like this." Maggie's hand found the armrest of the chair. Her knuckles were white, but her voice remained even. "Do you think he'll try again?" Charles hesitated. "I think he already did. And next time, he might be smarter." Abby stood now, crossing the room toward her. "Grandma, we need to protect it. We really do." Maggie gave her a slow nod, then turned back to Charles. "Can you help?" He smiled gently. "I can start the process, but you'll need a lawyer to make it airtight." "Good," she said. "Then let's begin." Charles pulled a form from his drawer and placed it in front of her. First, we make sure the records speak louder than rumors. As Maggie reached for the pen, her hand didn't tremble. Not this time. She had something stronger than fear now. She had proof. The office smelled like lavender oil and leather-bound confidence. Rachel Cooper sat behind a wide walnut desk, her black-framed glasses perched low on her nose as she flipped through the documents with the same calm intensity a surgeon might use before a delicate procedure. Maggie sat across from her, clutching the hem of her skirt beneath the table. Abby was to her right, phone on silent, fingers drumming anxiously on the armrest. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of pages turning and the occasional scribble of Rachel's pen. Finally, Rachel looked up. "You brought me a live one," she said. Maggie blinked. Sorry?" Rachel tapped the deed. "This isn't just paperwork. This is a full-blown fraud attempt, and it's clean. Documented. Easily provable." Abby leaned forward, hopeful. "So what does that mean?" "It means," Rachel said, folding her hands, "that your son, and likely his wife, have committed attempted property fraud. If we act quickly, we can stop them from ever trying it again. But we need to file." Now Maggie's voice came low, measured. "What kind of filing?" "A legal injunction first," Rachel replied, "to freeze all activity connected to the property. Then a full ownership reaffirmation with the county registrar. We'll lock this house so tight, not even a whisper of sale or loan can happen without your signature. After that, we begin a formal fraud report." Maggie looked down at her hands. They felt older in moments like this, more lined, more exposed. Her voice was steady, but there was hesitation laced into every syllable. "And if he denies it?" Rachel arched an eyebrow. "That's the beauty of paperwork, Mrs. Lane. It doesn't lie. We have the loan attempt. We have his name on it. And if we're lucky, we'll have more." Abby glanced at Maggie, then cleared her throat. "Vanessa. She talks too much. Always bragging. If I start recording, I can probably catch her saying something stupid." Rachel nodded approvingly. "That could help. Especially if it connects her to the forgery." Maggie swallowed hard. She was still in her church dress from the bank visit, and suddenly it felt tight around the collar. "I've never taken him to court," she murmured. "He's my son." Rachel's voice softened but didn't lose its edge. "And he forged your name. He tried to take your house. You didn't pick this fight, Margaret, but you have every right to finish it." The words landed with weight. Maggie didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at the framed diploma on Rachel's wall, then at the neat little clock ticking beside her nameplate. Seconds, counting forward. No one ever tells you when the moment comes, the moment when you stop being afraid of your own children. "I don't know how to fight," Maggie finally said. "Yes, you do," Rachel answered, calm and sure. "You just need the right tools. And a witness." As if on cue, the door creaked open and Harold Green stepped into the office, ball cap in hand, brow furrowed like he was stepping into a war room instead of a lawyer's office. "Told you I'd come if needed," he said, nodding toward Maggie. Rachel stood and offered her hand. "Mr. Green?" "Yep, I saw it all. I've got years of watching these two climb over Maggie like she was a rung in their ladder." Maggie looked up at him, a bit stunned. "I didn't ask you to come." "You didn't have to," he said plainly. "Some debts don't need reminders." Rachel looked between them, then opened a new file on her desk. "Then let's get to work." She handed Maggie a fresh set of papers and a pen. Maggie held it in her hand for a long second. It wasn't just ink and legal jargon. It was the first real act of resistance in a war she hadn't declared, but could no longer ignore. She signed. Abby exhaled audibly. Rachel smiled. Step 1. Complete. Maggie set the pen down gently, as if placing a match after lighting a fuse. The knock wasn't polite. It was a pounding. Sharp, rapid, and meant to be heard not just by Maggie, but by every neighbor on the block. Maggie didn't flinch. She set her tea down carefully on the table, the porcelain clinking gently against the saucer, then moved toward the front door. She didn't rush. By the time she opened it, Vanessa was already halfway through her next breath. "You betrayed us." Her voice cracked with heat, mascara slightly smudged under one eye, like rage had interrupted her vanity routine. She stood just outside the threshold, one high heel caught slightly in the porch slats. Behind her, Evan trailed half a step behind, lips tight, hands in his jacket pockets like they might disappear if he didn't move. "I protected myself," Maggie said, voice even. Not welcoming, but not weak. "You went to a lawyer!" Vanessa snapped, pushing past her and storming into the house as if ownership were just a matter of volume. "You filed legal documents behind our backs. Do you have any idea how that looks?" Maggie closed the door slowly behind her. Click. Abby, already seated at the edge of the hallway bench, pressed record on her phone and lowered it gently to her lap, screen dimming just in time. "I know exactly how it looks," Maggie said. "It looks like I'm not letting you steal what you never earned." Evan stepped inside, his tone clipped. "Mom, this isn't the way to handle things." She turned to him, calm as a storm waiting its turn. "Neither was forging my name." His face flickered. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. "No," she said. "It was a decision." Vanessa let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, give me a break. You're acting like we're criminals. It's your family. Everything we've done was for our future. Our kids?" "You don't have kids," Maggie said flatly. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. Just air and indignation. "I opened my home to you. I cooked, cleaned, watched your bills get paid with the roof I kept fixed. And you tried to sell it out from under me like I was already gone." Vanessa's voice went sharp. "You never respected us." "No," Maggie corrected. "I stopped trusting you." "Big difference," Evan finally snapped. "Why didn't you just come to me?" "We could have worked something out." "I tried," Maggie said. "Every time I called and you let it go to voicemail. Every time I asked a question and Vanessa answered for you." Vanessa stepped forward, again too close now. "You think some dusty piece of paper gives you power over us?" "No," Maggie said, picking up her tea again, "but the law does." Vanessa's face flushed crimson. "You want to fight? Fine, you're going to get one." She turned toward Abby, pointing a manicured finger. "And you?" "You're just letting her poison you? She's manipulating everyone." Abby didn't blink. "You manipulated a bank." Vanessa's lips parted, then snapped shut. Evan looked at his daughter like she'd just grown fangs. "Abby, this is not your place." "It's my family," Abby interrupted. "And I'm done pretending I don't see what's going on." Vanessa moved toward the door but paused just before leaving. "You'll regret this," she spat. "We'll see you in court." Maggie blew gently over her tea and took a long, slow sip. "I hope so," she said. "I like things in writing." Vanessa let out a frustrated shriek and stormed out, heels hammering the porch like gunshots. Evan lingered for half a breath, caught between guilt and pride, before following. The door slammed shut. Silence returned like a reward. Abby reached down and ended the recording. "Well," she said softly, "that ought to help." Maggie didn't answer right away. She just looked at the door, at the space where her son used to walk in with scraped knees and silly jokes, and now walked out with nothing but loss behind his eyes. She stirred her tea, the spoon ringing gently against the ceramic. The post went up the next morning. Big block letters over a filtered selfie of Vanessa, hair pulled back in a sleek bun, expression full of pity disguised as righteousness. "We've tried everything to help her. But at a certain point, senility and selfishness take over. Prayers for our family as we deal with someone who's forgotten what gratitude means. Family first, hard choices. Within minutes, it was shared, then reshared. Hearts, frowns, comments from people who only ever saw Maggie at church or behind the checkout line at the local grocery store. Some agreed, most hesitated. A few asked questions. Abby read the post 3 times before taking a screenshot and texting it directly to Rachel. 11:02 a.m. You'll want this? No emojis, no reaction, just strategy. At the kitchen table, Maggie flipped through an old Reader's Digest while her tea steeped beside her. The quiet in the house felt like a win now, not a void. She hadn't seen the post. She didn't need to. Harold called just before noon. "Hey, just saw the nonsense your daughter-in-law posted." "You want me to say something?" Maggie smiled into the phone. "Only if it's true." "Oh, it's true," Harold said. "You want the comment in public or private?" "Whatever makes you feel better." He laughed. "Public it is." By the time Maggie folded her magazine and stepped outside to clip the rosemary bush, Harold's reply was climbing in likes. "She's not senile. She's survived more than you've ever had to. I've seen her strength. Watched her raise a family alone, run a house, fix a roof with her bare hands, and show grace to people who didn't earn it. You're lucky she stayed quiet this long," Vanessa hadn't responded. Yet. Abby wandered outside and held out her phone to Maggie without a word. Maggie didn't even glance down. "You saved it?" she asked. "Every comment," Abby replied. "Screenshots are forever." Maggie nodded, gently snapping a sprig of rosemary and pinning it between her fingers. "Let them talk. People will say anything to an audience." Abby looked up from her phone. "You sure you don't want to post something back?" Maggie's eyes flicked toward the street. The old neighborhood was still. The breeze light. The same breeze that had carried her husband's sawdust through the yard when he built the porch. The same wind that once blew birthday balloons through the fence posts. Now it carried whispers, and she knew better than to chase them. "No," she said. "They're not talking to me. They're talking at me." I don't owe them a reply. Back inside, Rachel's message dinged through. 11:47 a.m. Perfect. Keep grabbing. Anything they post or delete. Words like senile help. They want a court battle? We'll make it their stage. Abby smiled at the screen, then saved the images to a new folder she labeled Exhibit A. "Rachel's in full war mode," she said. Maggie took her tea back to the table and sipped without comment. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't clicked like, hadn't posted a reply, hadn't even scrolled. But every silence felt deliberate now. Sharp, strategic. Let them post. Let them try to rewrite the truth through hashtags and half-truths. The truth didn't need to trend. It just needed to hold. That evening, a neighbor Maggie hadn't heard from in years, Beatrice from 3 doors down, called to check in. Her tone was casual, but the subtext was loud. "I saw something online." Didn't sit right with me. Maggie offered her the same thing she offered everyone now. No explanation. Just calm. "I'm fine, B. But thank you for calling." After the call, Maggie poured herself a second cup of tea, sat near the window, and watched the porch lights flicker on down the street. Each glow, each shadow cast across the sidewalk reminded her. She had lived here the longest, planted more trees, fixed more fences, buried more years into the bones of this neighborhood than anyone still living on the block. The envelope from the bank came on a Thursday. No fanfare. Just a plain white rectangle tucked neatly into Maggie's mailbox between a coupon flyer and a local political ad. She didn't open it right away. She didn't need to. The name in the corner, First Ridge Financial, was the same bank Charles worked for, the same bank that had already flagged Evan once. Maggie stood by the kitchen window, envelope in hand, watching two squirrels chase each other across the fence line like they had nothing in the world to worry about. She peeled it open carefully, slid the contents onto the table, and read. At the bottom of the second page, in stiff corporate language, it spelled out what she already suspected. A second loan attempt had been made, this time through an online portal. Different format. Same lie. Same forged signature. By noon, she was back in Charles's office, the folder in her hand thickening like a storm file. Charles held the paper at arm's length, reading glasses perched low on his nose. "They're desperate," he said flatly, setting it down. "The signature doesn't even match the last forgery." He's not even trying to be subtle anymore. Maggie didn't sit. Her voice was low. "Will this help the case?" Charles nodded. "Absolutely. Rachel's going to love this." Maggie didn't smile. "Good." That afternoon, Rachel's office buzzed with renewed energy. Legal pads stacked high, printouts crisscrossed over folders labeled Lane v. Lane. Abby sat in the corner with her laptop, earbuds in, reviewing old videos and voice memos. Rachel read the newest bank letter aloud, then tossed it onto the pile. "We'll file an amended fraud claim. This makes it easier. Shows a pattern. Shows intent. Judges love intent." She looked up at Maggie. "You sure you want to keep pressing forward?" Maggie didn't hesitate this time. "Yes. Even if they fight back harder?" "They already have." Abby clicked pause on her laptop and looked up. "I've got something." Rachel turned her way. "Go on." Abby unplugged her earbuds and hit play. Vanessa's voice burst from the speakers, casual and unguarded. "It's not like she even checks her mail. We could file 10 things in her name and she wouldn't know until it was over. Evan's handling it. It's just paperwork. Once it's done, we'll finally have control over that place, and we can tear down that ugly shed and put in something real." Rachel blinked. "Where did you get that?" Abby shrugged. "Phone in my hoodie pocket." She was on the phone with a friend. On speaker, Maggie didn't react. Not visibly. But she leaned forward slightly, her hand settling atop the folder on the desk like it belonged to her spine. Rachel pulled the audio file onto her desktop, saving it with the rest. "This is gold. Timeline, intent, collusion. This woman's mouth is doing half my job." Abby raised an eyebrow. "That's the funny thing about liars. They think talking louder makes them more convincing." Rachel chuckled under her breath. "Well, the court's going to have a field day with this." Maggie stood and walked slowly to the window. The late afternoon sun bled across the blinds, painting faint gold lines over her dress. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, with her back still to them, she said, "Let them build the case against themselves." Rachel's pen stilled. Abby looked toward her grandmother with something like awe. Maggie turned back, her face unreadable but sharp. Not just calm, cold. "They think this is a game of who can talk louder," she said. "But the truth doesn't shout." It waits outside. A car passed on the street, playing a tinny pop song through its open windows. Life rolled on, unaware that somewhere inside a lawyer's office, a noose made of signatures and arrogance was tightening. Rachel's office smelled like toner and tension. Stacks of labeled binders lined her desk like bricks in a barricade. One was marked deeds. Another, bank fraud, Lane case. A third was open in front of her, thick with printed screenshots, time-stamped social media posts, and a spreadsheet of audio files Abby had named with quiet sarcasm. Vanessa, bragging, Part 3. Evan lying again, and family rewrite attempt final.mp3. Rachel moved like a conductor, shuffling paper, checking page numbers, muttering under her breath. Every click of her pen felt like a countdown. Across from her, Maggie sat still, hands folded, eyes tracking the binder as if it were a living thing. She'd stopped pretending not to be afraid, but fear had changed shape. It no longer looked like surrender. It looked like fuel. "I printed everything twice," Rachel said, snapping a tab into place. "One for submission, one for backup. We're showing not just intent but pattern, leverage, and character assassination." And thanks to Abby, audio-proof Abby gave a small nod from the couch where she sat cross-legged, reading off a bulleted list. "I also edited the audio clips for clarity, cut out background noise, labeled by date, lined up with the timeline from the second loan attempt." Rachel smiled, just faintly. "You'd make a hell of a paralegal." Abby shrugged. "It's like editing a podcast, just with higher stakes." Rachel closed the binder, her voice cooling into something more surgical. "We don't need fireworks. We just need facts." Across town, Harold stood in front of his bathroom mirror, arms crossed, talking to his reflection like it owed him something. "I've lived next door to Margaret Lane since 1978. I've seen her raise that boy, fix that house, survive that grief. She never begged, never buckled." He stopped, took a breath. "No, too rehearsed." He started again. "I was there when Evan and Vanessa started treating her like furniture. I watched them lie. I heard Vanessa call the house dead space. That woman's never been dead space." The mirror didn't clap, but it didn't laugh either. That was enough. At the community cafe, Vanessa held court like it was a beauty pageant with bitter rules. 3 friends gathered around her booth, all nods and sideways glances. She was halfway through her iced latte and full throttle into her 5th retelling. She's spinning this whole story like she's some poor little grandma fighting for survival. It's pathetic. One friend offered a tight smile. "Are you sure it'll go your way?" Vanessa's laugh was hollow. "Of course. The woman's almost 75 and lives in the past. She doesn't understand how things work now." "I do." She tapped her manicured nail on the table like it was a gavel. Across the room, a young man in a hoodie had just started a new recording on his phone. He wasn't with them, but he was listening. At the town library, Maggie sat across from Abby, flashcards laid out between them like stepping stones. "Start with your name," Maggie said. Abby took a breath. "Abigail Lane. I'm 19. I live with my grandmother Louder," Maggie said gently. "Abigail Lane," she said again, firmer. "I recorded the conversation between Vanessa and her friend on October 12th. I can verify the voice, and I've timestamped the file." Maggie nodded. "Good. Keep your eyes steady when you say it. They'll try to rattle you." "And what about you?" Abby asked. "Are you ready?" Maggie looked down at the cards still in her lap. Her hands weren't shaking, but they weren't still either. "I'm getting there." She didn't lie. The nerves came in waves now, small ones, but cold. Courtrooms were built to intimidate. Suits and wood panels and the echo of every word you wish you'd said sooner. But then she remembered Vanessa's voice. Sharp, entitled, smug. She remembered Evan's silence and Harold's porch. "I'm not scared of the truth," Maggie said. "Just tired of how long it takes to win." The night before the hearing, Maggie stood at the edge of her porch, cup of chamomile in hand. Evan passed by on the sidewalk, earbuds in, head down like he didn't see her. He did, but he didn't stop. She didn't wave. He'd made his choices. The courtroom was colder than Maggie expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Sterile, still, like justice was something fragile being preserved behind glass. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the polished seal of Sangamon County. The walls were paneled in faux oak. The clock ticked loud. Vanessa was in cream. Perfectly pressed blazer, hair flat-ironed and slick, lips painted just the right shade of concern. She sat with crossed legs and a pen she hadn't touched, occasionally whispering into her lawyer's ear like she'd rehearsed this too. Evan sat beside her, palms flat on his knees, eyes darting toward Maggie every few seconds like he was waiting for her to blink first. She didn't. Maggie sat at the petitioner's table, flanked by Rachel and Abby. Her dress was dark blue, simple. Her purse stayed closed on the floor beside her, hands folded on the table like she was attending a town meeting, not a legal showdown. The judge, a woman named Harlan, late 60s, silver hair pulled tight at the back, adjusted her glasses. We're here today to assess property rights concerning the residents at 219 Willow Bend Road and the claims of unlawful attempts to leverage said property for financial gain without consent of the owner. Rachel stood first. She opened the binder with quiet finality, flipped to the first page, and spoke in a calm, surgical tone. Your Honor, we're prepared to submit proof of uninterrupted ownership by Margaret Lane. We have original notarized deeds, bank denial letters tied to forged applications, and recordings indicating knowledge of these forgeries by both Evan Lane and Vanessa Lane. Vanessa's lawyer cut in immediately, rising. We'd like to enter concern about Ms. Lane's cognitive state. There are questions. Rachel raised her voice just slightly. We have medical documentation confirming mental competency within the past 60 days. In addition, we have digital records showing awareness, coordination, and intention by the respondents to bypass her authority for financial benefit. The judge nodded once. Let's see the documents. Rachel handed them over with clean precision, then stepped aside. The judge flipped through them silently. The room held its breath. Vanessa's lawyer stood again, shifting tone. Even if the documents show past ownership, the intent here was not malicious. The Lanes were under the impression. Let's stop there, Judge Harlan said, not unkindly. Intent does not override forged signatures. If the owner did not give legal authorization, we proceed accordingly. Vanessa's jaw clenched. Harold was called next. He walked to the witness stand in his best denim jacket, hat respectfully removed, eyes unwavering. I've lived next to Margaret Lane for 44 years, he began, and I've watched her raise a family, fix more busted gutters than I can count, and give more than she ever got. What I've seen over the last year wasn't forgetfulness. It was theft. Slick, pretty theft with nice words and ugly motives. Rachel nodded slowly. Did you witness any conversations where the respondents implied or stated their intent to claim the house? I sure did, he said, looking directly at Vanessa. She called the place a dead asset. Said they'd tear down the rotting shed and build something marketable. I heard that clear as day from my porch. Rachel motioned to Abby. Abby walked forward, chin high, voice even. I recorded Vanessa saying they could file things in my grandma's name without her noticing. She said Evan was handling it, and that once it was done, they'd finally have control. The recording played. Vanessa flinched. The judge's pen stopped moving halfway through. After the final audio clip ended, silence fell over the courtroom like dust in sunlight. Judge Harlan leaned back, eyes on Maggie. Mrs. Lane, do you wish to speak? Maggie stood slowly, hands resting gently on the table. I don't want anything from them, she said. Not money. Not apology. Just the truth. On paper. Where it counts. The judge nodded once. Then again. She looked at the bailiff. Confirm full property rights remain with Margaret Lane. Click. The gavel didn't fall, but the weight did. Judge Harlan turned to Vanessa and Evan. We will also be referring this matter to the State Fraud Investigation Unit for review. The evidence is compelling and suggests deliberate misconduct. Vanessa's mouth opened in disbelief. Evan stared straight ahead. Maggie sat down again, slower this time. Beside her, Rachel smiled. Not big, not smug, just satisfied. Abby reached under the table and squeezed Maggie's hand. Vanessa's card declined at the boutique register with a flat beep that echoed louder than it should have. She smiled at the clerk, overly bright. Oh, must have hit the limit. Try it again? Another beep. Declined. Her throat tightened. She slipped another card from her wallet. Platinum, pristine. The swipe made her heart jump. Beep. Declined. The cashier gave a small, polite cough. Maybe check with your bank? Vanessa forced a laugh. It's probably a fraud alert. My husband was traveling last week. The clerk nodded without a word and slowly began folding the blouse back onto its hanger. Outside, Vanessa stood on the sidewalk, fingers frantically tapping her screen as she logged into the banking app. The numbers didn't lie. 2 accounts, frozen, joint credit line, restricted. Fraud inquiry pending, under review. Her lips parted but no sound came out. It was as if reality had clicked into place with the same cold finality as that courtroom pen on paper. The only difference was, this time, no one was watching to applaud. Across town, Evan slammed the trunk of his car closed, harder than necessary. He yanked his phone from his pocket and scrolled through unread emails. More from the fraud division. More, "We're currently investigating" subject lines. More silence from banks that had once practically begged him to take their money. He looked across the grocery lot and saw Maggie walking out of the store, a modest brown bag in each hand, Abby by her side. They didn't see him. Maggie was smiling faintly, talking. About green beans. Abby laughed, real, unbothered. There was no heaviness in the air, no looming sense of war anymore. Just a grandmother and granddaughter buying dinner on a Thursday afternoon. Cash only. He stayed frozen behind the steering wheel, watching. There was no confrontation this time, because there was nothing left to say. Back at Maggie's, Harold leaned against the porch rail with his coffee, watching her snip basil from the kitchen garden. He didn't need to say much, but he did anyway. Looks like the porch shouted true. Maggie stood, stretching her back with a satisfied sigh. Truth has a strange way of catching up. Even when it's old and tired, he grinned. Yeah, but your truth wears boots. It walks. Abby stepped out with 2 glasses of iced tea and handed one to Harold. He raised it slightly. To delayed justice. Maggie lifted her own glass in return, and to clean bank accounts. Later that evening, Maggie sat at her table clipping coupons. Out of habit more than need. Abby had gone to bed early, but not before placing another printout from Rachel on the fridge. An official letter confirming the fraud report had triggered account freezes for both Evan and Vanessa, pending review. Rachel's handwritten note at the bottom read, "Step by step." Let them melt down. Maggie folded another coupon with steady fingers. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the Lane house, the one that used to be filled with Evan's swagger and Vanessa's curated throw pillows, there was shouting. "She's destroying us," Vanessa hissed, pacing the living room. "You stood there like a ghost while they humiliated me in court." Evan didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the same screen he'd refreshed 5 times already. Still no bank access. Still no credit line. The echo of the judge's words, "Deliberate misconduct," looped in his head like a punishment song. "You said this would work," Vanessa snapped. "You said she wouldn't fight back." "She was supposed to fold," he muttered. "She didn't," Vanessa said, voice cracking. "She froze everything." She won Evan through the phone across the couch. "It's not over." Vanessa stared at him, hollow. "It is." The moonlight spilled through Maggie's kitchen window as she poured the last of her tea. She glanced once toward the house down the street. Lights still on. Shadows moving behind drawn blinds. Let them rage. Let them scramble. She didn't need vengeance. She had receipts. The gate creaked at 2:13 a.m. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. The kind of sound that snapped awake Maggie's new alarm system, installed just 2 weeks earlier by Sam, the town's trusted locksmith, who owed Harold a favor and liked a job done right. The sensor in the kitchen gave a soft beep, then a red flash. Motion detected. Maggie was already sitting up in bed. She didn't panic. She just reached into her drawer, pulled out her phone, and tapped the icon Sam had labeled Porch Cam, front and garden side. The feed came into focus. Vanessa, black hoodie, heels off, kneeling by the garden shed like she was picking herbs instead of prying open the lock with a hairpin. It would have been comical if it weren't so familiar. That house had always been hers. The porch, the shed, the flower beds. All hers. Maintained, repainted, repaired. The only thing different now was who held the keys. And tonight, Vanessa had come to steal what wasn't left for her. Across the street, Harold's porch light blinked on. His motion detector had caught the same shadow. He stepped out barefoot, holding a mug and muttering something about damn raccoons, until he saw the silhouette. Not a raccoon. Not a stranger. Just a woman too entitled to read court orders. Vanessa slipped the shed door open and ducked inside. Flashlight trembling in her hand, she rifled through drawers, overturned crates, opened file boxes Maggie hadn't touched in years. Then she found it. A weathered folder, tied with string. She cracked it open. Original utility bills, retirement paperwork, a birth certificate, copies of the deed, notes in Tom's handwriting. Something she could twist. Something to prove confusion. Something to plant later. She shoved it into her purse. She never heard the click of the back door unlocking behind her. She didn't have time, because then the siren sounded. Not blaring, not dramatic, but sharp and immediate. A digital bark echoing from under the eaves, triggering the neighborhood text chain Sam had connected to the system. Vanessa froze. 2 houses down, a light switched on. Then another. Then the cruiser headlights rolled in slow from the block's edge. Evan arrived just as Vanessa was being led down the driveway in handcuffs, purse still open, the edge of Maggie's folder peeking out like a confession. His headlights lit up her face, pale, shocked, mascara smudged from panic. Not pity this time. Jesus, Vanessa, he muttered, stepping out of the car. What did you do? Vanessa's voice cracked. I was just getting proof. She's hiding things. The officer raised an eyebrow. From her own shed? On her own property? At 2 a.m? Evan looked toward the porch, where Maggie now stood, robe cinched tight, cup of chamomile in one hand, the other resting lightly against the screen door. Their eyes met. For the first time in months, she didn't look away. He opened his mouth to speak, something between defense and apology. She raised one hand gently to stop him, then spoke, to no one in particular. Keys retired. Case closed. Rachel's phone lit up just before 3 a.m. Caller ID, Maggie Lane. She answered before the second ring. She came, Maggie said. Rachel didn't need to ask who. They took her? She asked instead. They did, Maggie replied. Evan was there. Just watched. Rachel exhaled. You, okay? I am now. Maggie ended the call without another word. By sunrise, the neighbors were already talking. Word of mouth moved faster than facts, but the truth didn't need to chase them anymore. It had teeth now. Maggie stepped onto her porch just as Harold emerged with his paper. Any trouble? He called out. Just one leftover shadow, she said. He nodded. Didn't last long. Maggie looked down the street. A black tire mark still lingered where the cruiser had idled. The porch light hummed behind her, steady and sure. She sipped her tea. Let the world spin. The locks held. Whisper. Steel doors hum louder than threats. The folding chairs in the old rec center had never seen a crowd like this. Rows filled early. The usual faces. Betty from the hardware store, Mr. Livingston from zoning, the McCarthys with their identical windbreakers, settled in shoulder to shoulder with curious onlookers, half the PTA, and people who hadn't attended a community meeting in years. There was a charge in the air. Not quite celebration, not quite curiosity. Just expectation. Mayor Hensley adjusted the mic at the front of the hall. A stocky man with silver sideburns and a maroon tie that never quite sat straight. He cleared his throat like he was about to announce a parade. "We don't normally do acknowledgments at these things," he said, eyes scanning the crowd. "But some things deserve to be said where everyone can hear 'em." Heads turned as Maggie walked down the side aisle, her steps measured but sure. She wore a pale gray coat, her scarf tucked neatly, her chin high. Abby walked just behind her, not guiding her, but standing with her. Maggie didn't rush. She never did anymore. Mayor Hensley gestured toward the row of folding chairs up front. "Margaret Lane, would you mind coming up here for a moment?" A soft ripple of murmurs floated through the room. Maggie stepped forward and sat on the edge of the first row, not on the dais. She didn't need elevation, just presence. Harold, standing a few paces back by the coffee table, cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was deeper than usual, scrubbed clean of Porch sarcasm. "I was there," he said, "when they laughed at her. When they tried to erase her like she was some name on an expired bill." Silence swept in like respect. Harold continued. "I watched her stand still when anyone else would have folded. I watched her walk away with dignity while they scrambled to sell the roof off her name. And I watched her prove every word with paper, patience, and spine." Rachel stepped up next, holding a simple manila folder. No courtroom, no judge's bench. Just truth. Stripped down. "For the record," she said, opening it, "I have official documentation of full property ownership in Maggie Lane's name, certified by the county. I have court orders confirming fraud, audio recordings confirming intent, and legal acknowledgement that both Evan Lane and Vanessa Lane are under active investigation for criminal conduct." The room remained silent. No gasps, no dramatic groans, just the sound of facts being spoken aloud and accepted. She looked toward Maggie. "You didn't just defend your house, you defended your history." Maggie nodded once, then sat still, hands folded. From the back row, a whisper. Low. Familiar. Evan. Seated near the exit, slumped in his folding chair, jaw tight. His button-up hung wrinkled, as if he'd lost the energy to iron it. He stared not at Maggie, but at the floor between them. Vanessa was nowhere in sight. Abby stood suddenly. She didn't plan it, just moved. Walked to the front of the room, turned to face the crowd, not shaking, not shy. "I used to think this town would always believe the loudest voice," she said, "but turns out they remember the quiet ones better." She turned to her grandmother. "You didn't fight them to be right. You fought because they were wrong." Then, without hesitation, she wrapped Maggie in a hug. And this time, Maggie didn't hold back. The applause wasn't thunderous. It wasn't theatrical. But it was real. It rolled through the room like wind against wheat. Long, steady, meaningful. Maggie didn't bow. She just stood and nodded once to the mayor, to the neighbors, to the people who had once looked away and were now meeting her eyes. Respect. Not pity. Harold raised his coffee in a quiet toast from the side. The mayor cleared his throat. And now, back to potholes and planning permits. Laughter. Not cruel. Just community. Outside, as the hall emptied, Maggie stepped onto the sidewalk. Evan stood near the lamppost, alone. He didn't speak. She didn't stop. But as she passed, he murmured, barely audible, "I didn't think you'd win." She didn't look at him, only replied, soft as wind, "You thought wrong." She walked on. And this time, no one followed her out to correct the story. Whisper. Respect restored in public light. The porch hadn't. She changed. Same faded boards, same slow creak rocker, same chipped ceramic mug that Harold insisted made the tea taste stronger. The sun warmed the wood just enough to make the morning feel like a welcome back, not a memory. Maggie sat in Harold's old rocking chair, her scarf looped neatly, the steam from her tea curling in lazy tendrils toward the soft autumn air. A breeze tugged gently at her sleeve. The neighborhood moved around her, light, present, alive. From across the street, the Parker twins called out, "Morning, Miss Lane." Maggie raised her mug in reply, a quiet salute. Mrs. Ellis walked past with her shepherd, stopping at the gate to wave. "You look good on that porch again, Maggie." "Feels like home," Maggie replied. Harold emerged from the front door, balancing a tray with lemon cookies and a second mug. "I leave for 5 minutes, and the whole town starts giving you back your crown." Maggie smiled softly. "I never asked for it." Harold placed the tray on the side table and lowered himself into the chair beside her, with the grace of someone who'd lived in his joints too long to pretend they didn't protest. "You didn't have to," he said. "They just had to remember where they left it." They sat in silence for a while. No war left to prepare for, no courtrooms waiting, just peace, and the slow rhythm of two old friends breathing the same air again. Abby came up the steps with a small gardening trowel in hand and dirt on her jeans. "I planted lavender in the front bed. Thought it'd do better than the roses." Maggie glanced toward the yard. "Smart choice." Abby sat on the steps, cross-legged, glancing back over her shoulder. "I'm gonna keep it going," she said. "The house, the garden, the whole place. Even if I don't stay here forever." Maggie tilted her head. "You don't owe me that, you know." "I know," Abby said, "but I want to." She looked down for a second, then added, "Legacy doesn't start with a will. It starts when someone pays attention." Harold let out a small huff. "That girl's got more sense than the rest of us had at 20. Maggie nodded, her gaze still soft. Just then, the familiar purr of Evan's old sedan crept around the corner. It didn't slow, but it didn't speed up either. The windows were tinted darker now, as if shame needed hiding. The car passed by like a ghost retracing its own regret. He didn't look up, but Maggie did. She watched the car retreat, watched the distance grow, then finally whispered, to no one in particular, "He called me nothing." "I became everything." Harold turned to her, his voice quiet and steady. "You always were." She didn't cry, not then. Just lifted the mug to her lips, took a long sip, and let the breeze carry the rest of her breath away. From the sidewalk, a new neighbor, young, nervous, carrying a sack of groceries, offered a tentative wave. "Are you Maggie Lane?" she asked. Maggie nodded. "I heard what you did," the girl said. "That was brave." Maggie only smiled. "Just reminded them who built the porch." The girl grinned. "Well, it's good to meet you." And just like that, she moved on. Life did that now. It moved around Maggie, not away from her. The porch stayed full a little longer that afternoon. 3 generations in stillness. Teacups, cookie crumbs, light laughter that didn't try too hard. Maggie leaned back in the rocker and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind do what it wanted with her hair. Whisper. Porch turned stage. The pen moved slow, but steady. Rachel sat across the desk, flipping pages as Maggie signed, her initials neat and deliberate in every corner. The legal pad beside them had already been filled, crossed out, rewritten, and underlined in Rachel's brisk, bullet-point handwriting. "This line here," Rachel said, tapping the bottom of the will, "clarifies that Abby inherits the house under a revocable trust. That means she can't be forced to sell it." "Not by anyone," Maggie looked up. "Even if someone claims blood?" "Especially then," Rachel said. "This isn't about lineage anymore. This is about truth." Maggie nodded, then signed the last page with a slow exhale, the kind that clears a life from worry. In her purse sat a folded note, written in blue ink on her old stationery. She'd been working on it for weeks, adding, subtracting, changing love to truth, and back again. Now it sat sealed in an envelope marked, "To Abby. Open when it's yours." The letter was short. Family is who defends you, not who names you. She didn't need more than that. By mid-afternoon, she was back at the bank, seated across from Charles, who had swapped his tie for suspenders and looked younger without the pressure of legal gray. "The pension transfer went through," he said, double-checking the screen. "You're officially listed as sole beneficiary, and Abby's added as co-signer on the trust account. No more red flags, no more access issues." Maggie leaned back in the chair and let the hum of the office fill the pause. Music played gently overhead. Same polite lies. But now, she knew the truth behind the sound. Charles offered a gentle smile. "You did more than save a house." Maggie tilted her head. "I saved a name." On the way home, the wind moved through the maple trees in slow waves. Gold and orange scattered down the sidewalk like breadcrumbs from another season. The porch waited in shadow and sun, like it always had. Harold stood on the steps, hat in hand. He looked at her the way people look at something finally restored to its rightful place, like a picture rehung after a storm. "Well done, Maggie," he said, tipping his cap. She didn't reply, didn't need to. Behind her, Abby stepped out of the car, clutching the folder Rachel had given her. "You okay?" she asked. Maggie turned to her, her eyes soft, but clear. "Better than." Abby set the folder down and moved fast, arms wrapping around Maggie's waist in a hug that didn't ask for permission. This time, Maggie held her tight. This time, she let it stay. As the wind rolled across the porch and tugged at the edge of the doormat, the house behind them stood whole. The walls hadn't changed, but something inside had. Later that night, Abby sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping through old photographs. Some black and white, some faded color, some with creases where Evan's face used to be before time folded the page too many times. Maggie handed her the letter without ceremony. "For later," she said. Abby held it close. "I'll keep it safe." They didn't say more. They didn't need to. In the quiet, a knock came from the front door. Maggie opened it to find the same neighbor girl from the week before, the one with the grocery bags and nervous smile. She held out a small pie, tin foil crinkled at the edges. "Thought you might like this. You've done a lot for the block." For everyone, Maggie accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." The girl hesitated, then said, "You feel like the heart of this place." Maggie looked out past the porch, down the street, where history was buried in the sidewalk cracks, and laughter still echoed if you knew where to listen. "Maybe I just outlived the noise," she said. But the truth was simpler. She'd built something they couldn't take. And no one, not blood, not betrayal, not shame, could undo it. Whisper. "Not family by blood, family by truth." And when the neighbor shouted from the porch, he gave me back what my own son tried to take. My place in the family I built.